Norman Ernest Borlaug, born on March 25, 1914, in Cresco, Iowa, emerged as one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. He grew up in a modest farming community where hard work and perseverance shaped his early character. His family was of Norwegian descent, instilling values of resilience, humility, and practicality. Rural life introduced him to agricultural challenges, including crop failures and unpredictable weather. These struggles created a foundation for his lifelong commitment to improving food security worldwide through agricultural science and innovation. Borlaug's childhood revolved around the rhythms of farm life, where he developed a deep appreciation for the land. From an early age, he helped his family with chores, experiencing firsthand the difficulties faced by farmers. This upbringing gave him empathy for rural populations who depended on agriculture for survival. Although his family had limited resources, they emphasized the importance of education. His time in rural schools introduced him to the basics of science and mathematics, subjects that would later become central to his groundbreaking career. Despite his family's financial constraints, Borlaug pursued education with determination. He attended a small one-room schoolhouse before moving on to Cresco High School, where he excelled in both academics and athletics. His passion for sports, particularly wrestling, helped him build discipline and resilience. He often credited wrestling with teaching him persistence in the face of setbacks. These qualities became critical in his future scientific endeavors, where experiments often failed before succeeding. His early academic promise hinted at the immense contributions he would later make globally. After completing high school, Borlaug enrolled at the University of Minnesota in 1933, during the Great Depression. Initially, he struggled with the financial burden of higher education, working various jobs to support himself. His admission was partly enabled by the National Youth Administration, a program that allowed students to work while studying. At Minnesota, Borlaug initially pursued forestry, a field reflecting his love for the outdoors. The university exposed him to scientific research, practical problem-solving, and professors who would deeply influence his intellectual journey. During his years at the University of Minnesota, Borlaug faced challenges balancing work and academics. He washed dishes, labored in fields, and held various odd jobs to pay for tuition. These experiences gave him resilience and reinforced his connection with working-class struggles. His initial forestry studies introduced him to ecology, plant biology, and conservation. However, an influential encounter with Elvin C. Stackman, a renowned plant pathologist, eventually redirected Borlaug's focus toward plant pathology. This decision set the stage for his future role in revolutionizing agriculture worldwide. Stackman's lectures deeply impressed Borlaug, especially on the topic of wheat diseases like rust. Stackman emphasized how fungal pathogens devastated crops, threatening food supplies across the globe. Borlaug was captivated by the idea that scientific intervention could save millions from hunger. Inspired by his mentor's teachings, he switched his focus from forestry to plant pathology and genetics. This shift marked a turning point in his academic path, opening opportunities for him to apply scientific methods to global agricultural challenges. His commitment to plant science grew stronger. By 1937, Borlaug had earned his Bachelor of Science degree in forestry. However, his desire to pursue plant pathology led him to continue postgraduate studies. He earned a master's degree in 1940, followed by a PhD in plant pathology and genetics in 1942, both from the University of Minnesota. His doctoral research concentrated on the effects of diseases on cereal crops, with a particular focus on wheat rust. These studies equipped him with knowledge that later became pivotal in developing disease-resistant wheat varieties. During his time as a graduate student, Borlaug also gained practical experience working with the U.S. Forest Service. He was assigned to projects in Massachusetts and Idaho, where he observed the impact of pests and diseases on forests. Although he valued these experiences, his passion increasingly gravitated toward agricultural science. His doctoral dissertation emphasized plant immunity and resistance, setting a foundation for his career. The timing was critical, as the world was on the brink of World War II, with food security becoming an urgent concern. In 1935, Borlaug met Margaret Gibson, whom he later married in 1937. Their marriage was a source of stability and encouragement throughout his career. Margaret accompanied him during his challenging early years, providing emotional support as he pursued demanding research projects. They raised 2 children together, balancing family life with Borlaug's extensive travels and commitments. Despite the difficulties of maintaining a family life while working globally, Borlaug always acknowledged Margaret's patience and sacrifice as instrumental in allowing him to continue his demanding scientific mission. As Borlaug completed his doctorate, the world entered a period of profound upheaval due to World War II. He briefly worked with DuPont, applying his skills to war-related projects such as developing adhesives and other materials. However, his passion remained rooted in agriculture and food production. In 1944, Borlaug accepted an invitation to join the Rockefeller Foundation's Cooperative Wheat Research and Production Program in Mexico. This opportunity marked the beginning of his most transformative work, which would eventually lead to the Green Revolution. In 1944, Norman Borlaug arrived in Mexico to work under the Rockefeller Foundation's Cooperative Wheat Research and Production Program. The program aimed to address the country's severe agricultural challenges, particularly wheat rust disease and low yields. Mexican farmers faced food insecurity, and traditional wheat varieties were unable to resist fungal pathogens. Borlaug quickly recognized the urgency of the situation. Despite limited infrastructure, scarce resources, and language barriers, he embraced the mission. His dedication to improving Mexico's wheat production laid the foundation for remarkable breakthroughs. Mexico's agricultural conditions were harsh. Wheat crops suffered from stem rust and other diseases, while yields remained insufficient to meet the growing population's needs. Farmers had little access to modern farming techniques or scientific knowledge. Borlaug, guided by his training under Elvin Stackman, began experimenting with crossbreeding wheat varieties. His approach was rigorous, combining fieldwork, experimentation, and long hours of observation. He often worked under extreme conditions, walking fields daily, making notes, and manually cross-pollinating wheat plants to develop disease-resistant, high-yielding varieties. One of Borlaug's key innovations in Mexico was the use of shuttle breeding. Traditional plant breeding involved testing wheat varieties once per year, delaying progress. Borlaug introduced a system where wheat was grown in 2 different locations annually: the highlands near Toluca during summer and the Yaqui Valley in Sonora during winter. This method allowed him to grow 2 generations each year, effectively doubling the speed of breeding experiments. Shuttle breeding accelerated his progress, producing varieties adaptable to multiple environments and resistant to diseases. Despite his enthusiasm, Borlaug faced skepticism from colleagues and resistance from traditional farmers. Many scientists doubted whether disease-resistant, high-yield varieties could be developed, while some farmers distrusted foreign researchers. Borlaug's persistence was relentless. He often recalled his wrestling background, emphasizing the importance of endurance and determination. Working tirelessly with his small team, he gradually won the trust of local farmers. By demonstrating tangible results in test plots, he began convincing communities that scientific innovation could transform agriculture and ensure food security. By the late 1940s, Borlaug and his team achieved notable breakthroughs. They developed wheat strains resistant to stem rust, leaf rust, and other diseases. These varieties not only survived fungal attacks but also produced higher yields. Borlaug recognized the importance of ensuring these plants could adapt to diverse environments, allowing their cultivation beyond Mexico. His relentless breeding efforts produced semi-dwarf wheat varieties with shorter stalks, preventing lodging, a problem where tall wheat collapsed under heavy grain. These innovations became crucial for the coming agricultural revolution. The introduction of semi-dwarf wheat represented a monumental shift in agriculture. Traditional wheat varieties often toppled under the weight of large grain heads, leading to significant losses. Borlaug's semi-dwarf plants had stronger, shorter stems, enabling them to carry heavier yields without collapsing. These varieties also responded well to fertilizers, further increasing productivity. By combining disease resistance, high yield potential, and adaptability, Borlaug created a genetic foundation for the Green Revolution. His Mexican wheat varieties soon demonstrated yields previously unimaginable to local farmers and policymakers. Throughout the 1950s, Borlaug's work in Mexico expanded. He collaborated with Mexican scientists, training a new generation of researchers in plant breeding and pathology. The program emphasized not only scientific discovery but also practical application, ensuring farmers adopted new technologies. Borlaug's insistence on field testing, farmer engagement, and local participation distinguished his approach from purely academic research. By the mid-1950s, Mexico achieved self-sufficiency in wheat production, a milestone credited largely to Borlaug's efforts. This success proved that agricultural science could transform entire economies. The impact of Borlaug's achievements in Mexico soon attracted global attention. Nations struggling with food insecurity, particularly in Asia, began seeking solutions to their agricultural crises. During the 1960s, India and Pakistan faced massive population growth and recurring food shortages, leading to widespread fears of famine. Influenced by Mexico's example, both countries invited Borlaug to introduce his high-yield, disease-resistant wheat varieties. The timing was critical, as political instability and economic challenges heightened concerns. Borlaug accepted the challenge, determined to prevent catastrophic hunger in Asia. When Borlaug first arrived in South Asia, he encountered overwhelming challenges. India and Pakistan were struggling with political tensions, limited infrastructure, and insufficient resources. Food shortages had created a climate of desperation, with millions at risk of starvation. Bureaucratic obstacles slowed the distribution of seeds and fertilizers, while skeptical officials questioned the feasibility of introducing new wheat strains. Yet Borlaug pressed forward, tirelessly advocating for large-scale adoption. His charisma, persistence, and scientific credibility gradually persuaded policymakers to embrace his agricultural innovations. By the late 1960s, Borlaug's wheat revolution was in full swing across South Asia. In India, wheat harvests increased dramatically, transforming the country from a grain importer to a self-sufficient producer within a few years. Similarly, Pakistan experienced record-breaking harvests, easing the threat of famine. Borlaug's semi-dwarf wheat varieties, combined with irrigation and fertilizers, revolutionized agriculture. The success became known as the Green Revolution. Borlaug's innovations saved millions from starvation and reshaped global perspectives on the power of science to address urgent human crises. The Green Revolution not only transformed food security but also reshaped political stability in South Asia. As wheat production surged, countries once dependent on foreign aid reduced their vulnerability to famine. This agricultural boom strengthened national confidence and allowed governments to redirect resources toward industrial and economic development. While Borlaug often avoided politics, he understood the broader consequences of his work. Feeding millions during a period of intense geopolitical tension elevated his reputation internationally, making him a symbol of science's power to solve humanitarian crises. Despite remarkable successes, Borlaug's efforts were not without controversy. Critics argued that the Green Revolution emphasized monocultures, reliance on chemical fertilizers, and irrigation, potentially leading to environmental degradation. They feared soil depletion, water shortages, and loss of biodiversity. Borlaug acknowledged these concerns but insisted that feeding starving populations was an immediate priority. He frequently defended his work by reminding detractors that ecological debates mattered little to those facing starvation. His pragmatic approach underscored his belief that hunger alleviation was humanity's foremost moral obligation. During the 1970s, Borlaug's influence extended beyond Asia. His high-yield wheat varieties spread to the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Nations like Turkey and Afghanistan benefited from his research, achieving improved food production. However, Africa presented greater challenges due to diverse climates, limited infrastructure, and political instability. Borlaug remained deeply committed to bringing his agricultural innovations to the continent. Although progress was slower, his advocacy inspired new generations of scientists and policymakers to invest in research and infrastructure aimed at addressing hunger in Africa. Borlaug's global impact reached its peak when he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. The Nobel Committee recognized his extraordinary contributions to reducing world hunger and promoting peace through agricultural development. In his acceptance speech, Borlaug emphasized that peace could not be achieved without food security. He warned that the battle against hunger was ongoing and that science must continue advancing to meet future challenges. The award elevated his profile, earning him the title, Father of the Green Revolution, a label he humbly carried. The Nobel Peace Prize brought Borlaug international acclaim, but it also placed him under greater scrutiny. He became a sought-after advisor to governments, institutions, and organizations worldwide. Despite newfound fame, he remained grounded, preferring fieldwork over political ceremonies. He often expressed discomfort with celebrity, insisting that recognition belonged to the teams of scientists and farmers who worked alongside him. Nonetheless, the Nobel Prize gave him a platform to advocate for increased agricultural investment, particularly in developing nations where hunger remained a persistent threat. Following his Nobel recognition, Borlaug continued to work with the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT, in Mexico. The institution became a global hub for wheat and maize research, training countless agricultural scientists from developing nations. Borlaug championed education and capacity building, believing that empowering local experts was the key to sustainable agricultural development. Through CIMMYT's programs, thousands of researchers learned modern breeding techniques and carried innovations back to their home countries. This training multiplier effect amplified Borlaug's impact far beyond his personal research efforts. During the late 1970s and 1980s, Borlaug increasingly turned his attention to Africa, where hunger crises persisted despite advances elsewhere. He frequently criticized international organizations for neglecting African agriculture. He argued that the same investments in infrastructure, irrigation, and seed technology that transformed Asia could also benefit African farmers. However, political instability, inadequate funding, and environmental challenges slowed progress. Borlaug personally visited African nations, urging governments and donors to act. His advocacy planted the seeds for later agricultural initiatives that would gradually expand across the continent. Borlaug's practical approach sometimes clashed with environmental movements emerging in the late 20th century. Critics accused him of promoting unsustainable practices dependent on chemical inputs and irrigation. Borlaug countered that without such innovations, famine would have claimed millions of lives. He acknowledged the need for ecological balance but argued that technological progress was essential to sustain a growing population. His perspective was often summarized in his warning, "You can't build peace on empty stomachs." To him, the moral imperative of saving lives outweighed theoretical debates. In addition to his scientific work, Borlaug became an influential teacher. He joined Texas A&M University in 1984 as a professor of international agriculture, where he trained students from around the world. His lectures were renowned for their passion, directness, and emphasis on real-world problem-solving. Students admired his humility and relentless energy, even in later years. Through teaching, Borlaug inspired future generations of agricultural scientists, ensuring that his knowledge and values would continue shaping global food security long after his personal research activities had concluded. Borlaug also became a leading figure in agricultural policy discussions. He advised organizations such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, the World Bank, and various governments. He often warned policymakers about complacency, stressing that food security required continuous scientific advancement. He opposed romanticized views of subsistence farming, arguing that modern technology was essential to feed billions. While some considered his positions controversial, Borlaug never wavered in his conviction that science, applied responsibly, was humanity's best defense against famine and mass starvation. As his career advanced, Borlaug received numerous awards and honors beyond the Nobel Peace Prize. These included the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2007, making him one of only a few individuals to receive all three highest civilian honors in the United States. Internationally, universities conferred honorary degrees, and governments celebrated him as a hero. Despite such accolades, Borlaug consistently downplayed his achievements, attributing success to collaboration and insisting that the battle against hunger remained unfinished. Borlaug's later years were marked by continued activism. Even into his 80s and 90s, he traveled extensively, visiting research centers, addressing conferences, and promoting agricultural innovation. He remained especially passionate about Africa, where food insecurity persisted. Partnering with the Sasakawa Africa Association and the Carter Center, he supported initiatives to train farmers, distribute improved seeds, and promote fertilizer use. His tireless advocacy earned him respect as a humanitarian, not only for his past achievements but also for his refusal to retire from the mission of feeding humanity. The Sasakawa Africa Association, founded in the 1980s, became one of Borlaug's major platforms for change on the African continent. Working alongside former U.S. President Jimmy Carter and Japanese philanthropist Ryoichi Sasakawa, Borlaug spearheaded initiatives to increase agricultural productivity in sub-Saharan Africa. Programs focused on providing farmers with access to improved seeds, fertilizers, and training. Borlaug spent countless hours traveling through rural villages, directly engaging with farmers. His hands-on approach distinguished him from policymakers who remained distant. He believed progress required meeting farmers face to face. In Africa, Borlaug faced some of the toughest challenges of his career. Poor infrastructure, unreliable markets, political instability, and limited government support slowed adoption of modern agricultural practices. Additionally, Africa's diverse climates and soils made it difficult to apply uniform solutions. Yet Borlaug's persistence never faltered. He often reminded colleagues that agricultural development in Asia had once seemed equally impossible. His message was clear: science and dedication could overcome obstacles, provided there was sufficient willpower and international cooperation to support the effort. Borlaug's dedication earned him admiration from many African leaders, though critics continued voicing environmental concerns. Some argued that his push for fertilizers and high-yield crops ignored traditional practices. Borlaug responded with pragmatism, explaining that hunger could not be addressed solely through tradition. He believed modern techniques should complement, rather than replace, local knowledge. His advocacy encouraged African governments to experiment with hybrid approaches, combining modern science with indigenous practices. Through this balanced perspective, Borlaug sought sustainable progress while addressing urgent human needs. While working in Africa, Borlaug frequently emphasized education as the cornerstone of agricultural progress. He lamented the shortage of trained agronomists, plant pathologists, and extension workers on the continent. To address this, he worked to expand training programs through partnerships with universities and international organizations. He urged African nations to invest in agricultural schools and research institutes, believing local expertise was essential for long-term food security. His efforts reflected his philosophy that science could not remain confined to laboratories but must be shared widely. Borlaug's teaching career at Texas A&M University complemented his African initiatives. There, he mentored both American and international students, many of whom later played key roles in global agricultural development. Known for his straightforward style, Borlaug inspired students with stories from the field, blending scientific rigor with humanitarian urgency. He encouraged them to view agriculture not only as a science but also as a moral mission. Students often described him as a mentor who demanded hard work but modeled extraordinary dedication himself. Despite his accomplishments, Borlaug never shied away from criticizing complacency in global food policy. He often warned that the world risked repeating past mistakes by underinvesting in agricultural research. He argued that the Green Revolution was not a finished story but an ongoing responsibility. His speeches frequently cautioned against assuming that hunger had been permanently defeated. Population growth, environmental change, and resource scarcity posed new threats. Borlaug's sense of urgency sometimes unsettled policymakers, but his message remained consistent: complacency was humanity's greatest enemy. As biotechnology advanced in the late 20th century, Borlaug became an outspoken supporter of genetically modified, GM, crops. He saw biotechnology as a natural extension of plant breeding, capable of accelerating progress against hunger. While critics raised ethical and ecological concerns, Borlaug argued that GM crops could offer disease resistance, drought tolerance, and higher yields. He urged regulators and activists to weigh risks against the cost of inaction, stressing that millions of lives depended on agricultural innovation. His position aligned him with emerging scientific frontiers. Borlaug's advocacy for biotechnology placed him at the center of heated debates. Environmentalists often accused him of promoting industrialized agriculture at the expense of ecological balance. Borlaug responded firmly, reminding audiences that his critics usually came from affluent societies far removed from hunger. He argued that rejecting technological solutions on ideological grounds was a privilege denied to starving families. His ability to frame the debate in human terms kept him relevant in global discussions, even as the scientific landscape shifted toward genetic engineering. Over time, Borlaug's legacy was celebrated more broadly. In 1986, the World Food Prize was established in his honor, recognizing individuals who advanced human development through agriculture. Borlaug played an active role in selecting laureates and promoting their work. He viewed the prize as a platform to highlight unsung heroes in agricultural science, ensuring that global attention remained focused on food security. Through this initiative, he institutionalized recognition for agricultural achievements, inspiring countless scientists to pursue research dedicated to ending hunger worldwide. Despite his many commitments, Borlaug valued family deeply. His wife Margaret, who had supported him since their marriage in 1937, remained his steadfast companion until her passing in 2007. They raised 2 children, and Borlaug often expressed gratitude for the sacrifices his family endured while he traveled the world. His daughter, Jeannie, later became active in promoting agricultural causes, continuing aspects of her father's mission. Family life grounded Borlaug, reminding him of the personal sacrifices entwined with his global humanitarian journey. By the early 2000s, Borlaug's health began to decline, but his energy remained remarkable for his age. Even in his 90s, he delivered speeches, advised policymakers, and championed agricultural science. Colleagues marveled at his stamina and unyielding spirit. He was deeply troubled by persistent hunger in Africa and remained critical of global institutions for moving too slowly. His personal motto seemed unchanged: the work of feeding the world was never finished. This lifelong sense of urgency defined his legacy as much as his scientific breakthroughs. Norman Borlaug passed away on September 12, 2009, in Dallas, Texas, at the age of 95. His death marked the end of an era in agricultural science, but his influence lived on through the millions of lives saved by his work. Leaders around the world paid tribute, recognizing him as a humanitarian whose innovations changed history. For farmers in Mexico, Asia, and beyond, Borlaug remained more than a scientist. He was a benefactor who turned despair into hope, ensuring food security for countless families. Norman Borlaug's death in 2009 prompted worldwide reflection on his extraordinary legacy. Obituaries in major newspapers highlighted his title as "the man who saved 1 billion lives," a phrase acknowledging the staggering number of people whose survival depended on his innovations. International leaders described him as one of the greatest humanitarians of the 20th century. While Borlaug often resisted such titles, insisting that science was a collective effort, few could dispute that his wheat varieties and advocacy transformed the trajectory of global food security. In the years following his passing, scholars debated Borlaug's place in history. Many ranked him alongside medical pioneers like Louis Pasteur or Jonas Salk, scientists whose discoveries directly saved lives. Borlaug's impact, though less visible, was equally profound. Where Salk had conquered polio, Borlaug had conquered famine. By enabling nations to feed themselves, he reduced dependence on foreign aid, strengthened political stability, and prevented mass migrations caused by starvation. His contributions bridged science, humanitarianism, and peacebuilding, placing him firmly within the pantheon of transformative figures. The phrase, "Father of the Green Revolution," became inseparable from Borlaug's identity. The Green Revolution, which began with wheat in Mexico and expanded to rice in Asia, reshaped agriculture in the 20th century. Its essence lay in improved crop genetics, combined with fertilizers, irrigation, and modern farming techniques. Borlaug's semi-dwarf wheat varieties were the movement's cornerstone, but his leadership, persistence, and ability to inspire governments ensured global adoption. Without his relentless drive, agricultural science might have progressed more slowly, leaving millions vulnerable to hunger. Yet Borlaug's legacy remains contested. Environmentalists, particularly during the late 20th century, criticized aspects of the Green Revolution. They argued that reliance on chemical fertilizers and pesticides led to pollution, soil degradation, and reduced biodiversity. Critics also warned of social inequalities, as wealthier farmers benefited more than smallholders. Borlaug acknowledged these issues but emphasized that the Green Revolution bought humanity time. By averting immediate famine, societies could later address sustainability. His pragmatism reflected his view that ethical debates could not override urgent humanitarian necessity. Borlaug's critics also raised concerns about water usage and irrigation practices. In countries like India, the expansion of irrigated farmland strained water resources, creating long-term ecological risks. Monocultures reduced genetic diversity, making crops more vulnerable to future diseases. Borlaug countered that technological innovation should evolve continuously. He saw the Green Revolution as the first step, not the final solution. In his view, science must constantly adapt to emerging challenges. His pragmatic optimism reassured policymakers that problems created by technology could be solved by further innovation. Historians often note Borlaug's unique position at the intersection of science and diplomacy. Unlike most scientists, he engaged directly with heads of state, bureaucrats, and farmers. His ability to navigate these worlds made him an effective agent of change. He persuaded skeptical governments in India and Pakistan to adopt his wheat, often under tense political conditions. His credibility as a scientist, combined with his relentless personal energy, gave him unusual authority. In this way, Borlaug blurred the line between researcher and statesman, wielding influence globally. One of Borlaug's enduring strengths was his humility. Despite accolades, including the Nobel Peace Prize, the Congressional Gold Medal, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he often downplayed his role. He described himself as a stubborn Iowa farm boy who simply refused to give up. When called a hero, he redirected credit to teams of scientists, farmers, and institutions that made large-scale change possible. His modesty contrasted sharply with his monumental impact, reinforcing his reputation as a man driven by duty rather than ambition. Education remained central to Borlaug's philosophy. At Texas A&M University, he mentored future agricultural leaders, many from developing countries. His teaching style combined scientific rigor with moral urgency. He told students that science was not an abstract pursuit but a tool for saving lives. Many protégés recalled his fiery insistence that hunger was humanity's greatest solvable problem. Through teaching, Borlaug extended his influence beyond his lifetime, equipping a new generation with the skills and conviction to continue battling food insecurity worldwide. The establishment of the World Food Prize in 1986 further cemented Borlaug's legacy. Modeled after the Nobel Prizes, it celebrated achievements in agriculture, food production, and nutrition. Borlaug envisioned the prize as a way to honor overlooked heroes, scientists, policymakers, and farmers whose contributions rarely made headlines. Each year, laureates highlighted ongoing innovations, from biotechnology to nutrition programs. The World Food Prize kept global attention focused on agriculture, ensuring Borlaug's mission remained alive. His active involvement until his death reflected his refusal to step away from advocacy. Borlaug's philosophy can be summarized by his consistent emphasis on science with a purpose. He saw agricultural research not as an academic pursuit but as a moral obligation. His career embodied applied science directed toward solving immediate human problems. This practical orientation distinguished him from more theoretical researchers. His insistence on fieldwork, walking wheat fields, talking to farmers, and testing varieties in harsh conditions, ensured that his discoveries addressed real-world needs. Borlaug's example redefined agricultural science as both a humanitarian endeavor and a scientific discipline. Recognition of Borlaug's contributions extended globally. Statues of him stand in the U.S. Capitol's National Statuary Hall and in Iowa, honoring his roots and international impact. Universities across the world established scholarships and programs in his name. Scientific institutions continue referencing his breakthroughs in plant breeding as foundational to modern agricultural research. For policymakers, Borlaug's life remains a case study in the power of applied science to shape history. His legacy transcended national borders, embodying the principle that knowledge must serve humanity. Ultimately, Borlaug's legacy embodies paradoxes. He was both praised as humanity's savior and criticized as a promoter of industrial agriculture. He acknowledged imperfections in the Green Revolution while maintaining its necessity. He embraced biotechnology despite controversies, insisting that science could adapt to new challenges. He resisted personal glorification yet accepted global honors. These contradictions make his story compelling, reflecting the complexity of feeding billions in a changing world. His life illustrates that humanitarian progress is rarely perfect but always urgent. Mexico served as Borlaug's proving ground, and its transformation highlighted the power of agricultural science. When he first arrived in 1944, Mexico was a grain-deficient nation, importing large quantities of wheat. Farmers suffered from low productivity and recurring plant diseases. Through persistent experimentation, Borlaug's team developed disease-resistant, semi-dwarf wheat varieties. By the late 1950s, Mexico not only achieved self-sufficiency in wheat production but also became an exporter. This dramatic shift validated Borlaug's vision and offered a model that could be adapted elsewhere in the developing world. The Mexican government initially viewed Borlaug's work with skepticism, but results gradually silenced doubts. Yields rose steadily, and rural communities benefited from improved harvests. Mexican scientists trained under Borlaug continued his research, ensuring sustainability beyond his direct involvement. The success demonstrated that collaboration between governments, international foundations, and local farmers could achieve transformative outcomes. Borlaug considered Mexico one of his proudest achievements, not only for the agricultural breakthrough but also for the creation of institutional capacity that supported future innovation in plant science. India became the most dramatic stage for Borlaug's Green Revolution. During the 1960s, the country faced soaring population growth and frequent food shortages. Famine loomed as a real possibility, threatening millions of lives. At the time, India relied heavily on food aid from countries such as the United States. Political leaders, including Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, recognized the urgency of reform. They invited Borlaug to introduce his wheat varieties, a decision that altered the nation's trajectory. India's fields soon became laboratories for the Green Revolution. When Borlaug arrived in India, he confronted logistical, political, and cultural challenges. Transportation networks were underdeveloped, and bureaucracy slowed seed distribution. Farmers were initially cautious about adopting unfamiliar varieties. Furthermore, fertilizer and irrigation systems required expansion to support the new wheat. Despite these obstacles, Borlaug worked tirelessly with local scientists and government officials to implement large-scale demonstrations. His persistence paid off. By the late 1960s, India's wheat harvests surged, transforming the nation from a food importer to a self-sufficient grain producer within a decade. The results in India were astonishing. In Punjab, once a food deficit region, wheat yields doubled and even tripled. Storage facilities struggled to accommodate the unprecedented harvests. Fields that once yielded scarcity now produced abundance, symbolizing the triumph of science over despair. The rapid increase in food production strengthened national stability, reducing dependence on foreign aid. Borlaug often described these moments as deeply emotional, recalling the joy of farmers who had endured years of hardship. For him, India's transformation embodied the humanitarian essence of his mission. Pakistan also witnessed dramatic change under Borlaug's influence. Like India, Pakistan faced population pressure and recurring shortages during the 1960s. The government, under President Ayub Khan, adopted Borlaug's wheat varieties with urgency. Borlaug traveled extensively across Pakistan, working alongside scientists and farmers to implement new techniques. Within a few years, Pakistan's wheat production nearly doubled. By the early 1970s, the nation achieved self-sufficiency in wheat, an achievement celebrated as a national triumph. Borlaug's work helped prevent famine and strengthened political stability during a turbulent era. In both India and Pakistan, Borlaug's interventions carried geopolitical consequences. Reduced dependence on foreign food aid lessened external political pressures, granting these nations greater autonomy. Agricultural self-sufficiency became a symbol of national pride. While political tensions between India and Pakistan remained fierce, both countries shared a common debt to Borlaug's wheat revolution. Historians argue that by alleviating famine threats, Borlaug indirectly contributed to regional stability. His work illustrated how agricultural science could function as a form of diplomacy, reshaping international relations through humanitarian outcomes. Borlaug often reflected on his experiences in South Asia with humility and emotion. He recalled sleepless nights worrying about whether the wheat would thrive under local conditions. He remembered the bureaucracy, skepticism, and political resistance that threatened to derail progress. Yet the overwhelming success convinced him that science could overcome formidable barriers. India and Pakistan's transformation solidified his reputation as a global savior. The title, "Man Who Saved a Billion Lives," originated largely from his achievements in South Asia, where famine once seemed inevitable. While the Green Revolution saved lives, it also introduced social complexities. In India, wealthier farmers with access to irrigation and fertilizer benefited most from Borlaug's varieties. Smaller farmers sometimes struggled to compete, raising concerns about inequality. Additionally, the environmental strain of intensive farming, overuse of groundwater, soil depletion, and pesticide reliance, became apparent over time. Borlaug acknowledged these challenges but argued that they were preferable to famine. He believed that governments and scientists bore responsibility for addressing long-term sustainability while continuing to prevent starvation. Borlaug's direct interactions with farmers in India and Pakistan left lasting impressions. He often spoke of visiting villages where families embraced him with gratitude for improved harvests. In some regions, farmers named fields or local projects in his honor. These personal connections reminded Borlaug that his work was not abstract but profoundly human. He considered the smiles of children who no longer went hungry as his greatest reward. Such experiences reinforced his conviction that agricultural science was fundamentally a humanitarian endeavor, transcending politics and accolades. Mexico, India, and Pakistan formed the core of Borlaug's Green Revolution success stories, but their lessons extended globally. His approach, rigorous science, farmer collaboration, and relentless advocacy, became a template for agricultural development worldwide. Governments and international agencies began to recognize agriculture as a pillar of national security and economic growth. Borlaug's work demonstrated that hunger was not an inevitable outcome of population growth but a solvable problem when science, policy, and human will converge. These achievements secured his place in history as a transformational figure. The case studies of Mexico, India, and Pakistan reveal Borlaug's adaptability. He tailored solutions to local conditions, refusing to rely on one-size-fits-all strategies. He adjusted seed varieties, fertilizer recommendations, and irrigation systems to suit each environment. This flexibility distinguished him from less practical scientists. Borlaug believed deeply in applied science, solutions tested in fields rather than confined to laboratories. His hands-on approach created credibility among farmers, ensuring that his innovations were trusted and adopted. This adaptability was key to his extraordinary global success. Africa became Borlaug's greatest unfinished mission. While Asia and Latin America experienced rapid agricultural transformation, Africa lagged behind due to complex challenges. Diverse climates, fragile soils, weak infrastructure, and political instability created barriers that scientific solutions alone could not overcome. Borlaug recognized Africa's potential yet lamented the slow progress. He frequently warned that neglecting African agriculture would invite humanitarian disaster. His passion for the continent defined much of his later career, as he sought to adapt lessons from Mexico and Asia to African conditions. In 1986, Borlaug helped establish the Sasakawa Africa Association with Japanese philanthropist Ryoichi Sasakawa and former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. The organization aimed to transfer agricultural technologies and training to African farmers. Borlaug traveled extensively through sub-Saharan Africa, visiting fields in Ethiopia, Ghana, Tanzania, and other nations. Unlike policymakers who stayed in conference halls, Borlaug insisted on meeting farmers directly. His presence in villages encouraged adoption of new methods. Through hands-on engagement, he built trust and inspired hope in struggling rural communities. The Sasakawa program emphasized practical improvements, distributing high-yield crop varieties, expanding fertilizer use, and training extension workers. Borlaug believed these small steps would build momentum toward larger transformations. Farmers who adopted modern practices often reported doubling or tripling yields. However, progress was uneven. Poor roads hindered distribution of inputs, while political instability disrupted programs. Borlaug remained undeterred. He often said Africa reminded him of India in the 1960s, difficult, chaotic, and seemingly hopeless, yet ultimately full of possibility if given resources and determination. Borlaug frequently criticized wealthy nations and international organizations for failing Africa. He argued that governments and donors devoted too little attention and funding to agricultural development. He warned that without investment, Africa would face recurring famines. His speeches were blunt, sometimes angering officials, but his urgency reflected the human cost of inaction. He framed hunger not only as a humanitarian crisis but also as a threat to peace and stability. His relentless advocacy kept African agriculture on the global agenda, even amid competing priorities. Despite setbacks, Borlaug cherished his work in Africa. He often described the joy of seeing smallholder farmers achieve record harvests for the first time. He believed these victories, though less dramatic than Asia's Green Revolution, were equally significant. For him, even modest yield improvements represented children with fuller stomachs and communities with renewed hope. Borlaug remained convinced that Africa's transformation was possible, though he admitted progress might take longer. His humility and persistence endeared him to farmers, who saw him as a genuine ally. As Borlaug's work continued in Africa, global debates about biotechnology intensified. In the 1990s and 2000s, genetically modified, GM, crops became controversial. Supporters saw them as tools to combat hunger and climate change, while opponents raised ethical and ecological concerns. Borlaug firmly supported biotechnology. To him, genetic engineering was simply the next phase of plant breeding, capable of accelerating progress against disease and drought. He argued that opposition often came from affluent societies insulated from hunger, whereas poor farmers could benefit most. Borlaug's stance on biotechnology reflected his lifelong pragmatism. He believed every available scientific tool should be used to prevent famine. While acknowledging risks, he argued that regulatory frameworks and careful management could mitigate them. His speeches often criticized what he called elitist environmentalism, which prioritized abstract ideals over human survival. Though controversial, his advocacy influenced policymakers and agricultural organizations. He encouraged young scientists to embrace genetic engineering responsibly, predicting that biotechnology would be essential to feeding future generations amid population growth and climate pressures. At Texas A&M University, Borlaug shared these convictions with students. His lectures combined scientific detail with urgent moral appeals. He challenged students to see agriculture as more than a profession, portraying it as a humanitarian mission. Many described his teaching style as passionate and relentless, filled with stories from Mexico, India, and Africa. He emphasized resilience, reminding them that scientific progress often involved repeated failure before success. By mentoring new generations, Borlaug ensured his knowledge and values would continue shaping global agricultural development. Borlaug also remained active in international conferences, even into his 90s. He addressed gatherings of scientists, policymakers, and philanthropists, urging them not to grow complacent. He frequently warned that the Green Revolution was not permanent. Population growth, resource scarcity, and climate change posed new threats to food security. He called for renewed investment in agricultural research and infrastructure. Audiences were often struck by his energy and conviction, marveling at a man of advanced age who still traveled the globe, advocating tirelessly for humanity's survival. Recognition continued to pour in during Borlaug's later years. In 2007, at age 93, he received the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor bestowed by the U.S. Congress. He joined an elite group of individuals who had also received the Nobel Peace Prize and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Such accolades cemented his status as one of history's most decorated humanitarians. Yet Borlaug responded with characteristic modesty, insisting that hunger remained unresolved. He accepted honors not as personal triumphs but as reminders of unfinished work. Personally, Borlaug endured both joy and loss in his later years. His wife, Margaret, passed away in 2007 after 7 decades of marriage. Her death was a profound blow. Borlaug often spoke of her unwavering support throughout his career. She had managed family responsibilities while he traveled constantly, and he credited her sacrifice as vital to his success. Despite grief, he continued his advocacy. Family, especially his daughter Jeannie, provided comfort. His resilience during these years reflected the same determination that characterized his scientific journey. By the late 2000s, Borlaug's health began declining. Yet even as his strength waned, he continued writing, advising, and mentoring. He remained deeply concerned about Africa, warning that progress lagged dangerously. On September 12, 2009, Norman Borlaug passed away in Dallas, Texas, at age 95. Tributes poured in from world leaders, scientists, and farmers. Obituaries hailed him as one of history's greatest humanitarians. His death marked the end of an era, but his influence lived on in every field transformed by his Green Revolution. Norman Borlaug's passing in 2009 sparked a wave of tributes across the globe. Leaders from diverse nations praised him as a humanitarian whose scientific achievements had saved more lives than perhaps any other individual in history. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter described him as a true hero to humanity. In India, newspapers highlighted how Borlaug's wheat varieties helped avert famine in the 1960s. Farmers, scientists, and policymakers remembered him not just as a scientist but as a tireless advocate for feeding the hungry. Memorial services honored both his scientific brilliance and his humanitarian spirit. At Texas A&M University, colleagues and students gathered to celebrate his legacy. Many shared personal stories of his mentorship, recalling his unrelenting energy and ability to inspire. In Mexico, where his career began, farmers commemorated him as the man who transformed their wheat fields into symbols of abundance. His name became synonymous with hope, progress, and determination. The widespread mourning reflected the global scope of his influence, crossing borders, cultures, and generations. International organizations also honored Borlaug's memory. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations praised his life's work as central to achieving food security in the modern era. The World Food Prize, an award he had helped establish in 1986, became one of the most prominent ways to sustain his legacy. Each year, new laureates dedicated to agricultural innovation are celebrated in his name. The continuation of this prize ensures that Borlaug's mission remains alive, encouraging ongoing commitment to fighting hunger worldwide. Despite the tributes, debates about Borlaug's legacy persisted. Supporters hailed him as the man who prevented mass starvation, calling him the "father of the Green Revolution." They argued that his wheat varieties and advocacy had transformed agriculture, saved hundreds of millions of lives, and created economic opportunities for developing nations. Critics, however, raised concerns about environmental costs. They argued that intensive fertilizer use, monocultures, and irrigation projects damaged ecosystems and led to long-term soil degradation. This dual perspective made Borlaug's legacy both celebrated and contested. Borlaug himself anticipated such criticisms. Throughout his career, he acknowledged the environmental consequences of intensive agriculture but insisted the alternative, mass starvation, was worse. He often said, "You can't build a peaceful world on empty stomachs." His philosophy prioritized human survival first, with environmental adjustments to follow. Many historians later suggested that his approach was pragmatic given the urgent crises of his time. Without the Green Revolution, they argued, famine would have killed millions more, potentially destabilizing entire regions politically and economically. One key debate centered on whether the Green Revolution deepened inequality among farmers. Larger landowners were often better positioned to afford fertilizers, irrigation, and machinery, allowing them to benefit more than smallholders. Critics suggested that this widened economic gaps in rural communities. Borlaug, however, believed that with the right policies, such as credit access and extension services, small farmers could also thrive. He saw science as neutral, with social and political systems determining distribution. For him, the real challenge was not technology but governance. Another criticism focused on biodiversity. The widespread adoption of uniform high-yield varieties sometimes displaced traditional landraces, reducing genetic diversity in crops. Environmentalists argued this could make agriculture more vulnerable to pests and diseases in the long run. Borlaug acknowledged the concern but argued that crop improvement programs could integrate biodiversity safeguards. He believed conservation and productivity were not mutually exclusive. His later advocacy emphasized balancing yield gains with genetic diversity, underscoring his awareness that agricultural progress required sustainability as well as productivity. In the context of climate change, Borlaug's ideas gained renewed relevance. Rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, and emerging pests threaten global food security. Many scientists argue that a second green revolution is needed, one that incorporates both Borlaug's focus on yield and modern environmental priorities. His legacy influences current initiatives in drought-resistant crops, precision farming, and sustainable intensification. Agricultural leaders often cite Borlaug's example when advocating for increased research investment, noting his work demonstrates how science, applied with urgency, can prevent humanitarian catastrophe. Educational institutions also played a role in preserving Borlaug's legacy. The Norman Borlaug Institute for International Agriculture at Texas A&M continues his mission by training future agricultural leaders and implementing projects in developing nations. Programs emphasize not only science but also the social dimensions of agricultural development. By combining research with on-the-ground action, the institute reflects Borlaug's conviction that science must reach farmers directly. This institutional legacy ensures that his philosophy remains active, shaping both policy and practice in global agriculture. Public memory of Borlaug also expanded into cultural narratives. Documentaries, biographies, and articles presented him as a humanitarian hero, often comparing him to figures like Albert Schweitzer or Jonas Salk. His story embodied the power of applied science to transform societies. Yet unlike many celebrated scientists, Borlaug focused less on theoretical breakthroughs and more on practical outcomes. He rarely sought personal recognition, preferring to highlight the farmers whose lives changed through improved harvests. This humility made his story resonate deeply with ordinary people. In the years after his death, Borlaug's legacy became especially relevant to discussions about Africa's agricultural future. Policymakers and scientists often debated whether the continent could replicate Asia's Green Revolution. Many pointed to Borlaug's tireless advocacy as evidence that transformation was possible. Initiatives promoting drought-tolerant maize, improved cassava varieties, and climate-resilient rice often cited Borlaug's influence. His insistence on combining research, infrastructure, and political will shaped strategies for addressing Africa's food challenges, reinforcing the timeless relevance of his practical vision. Statues and monuments also commemorated Borlaug. In 2014, on the centennial of his birth, a statue of him was placed in the U.S. Capitol's National Statuary Hall, representing the state of Iowa. The sculpture depicted him in a field, examining wheat, an image capturing both his scientific identity and his connection to farmers. Across universities, agricultural institutes, and research centers worldwide, lecture halls and scholarships were named in his honor. These symbols ensured that his contributions would remain visible to future generations of students and scientists. Norman Borlaug's leadership style was defined by persistence, pragmatism, and direct engagement. Unlike many scientists who remained in laboratories, he insisted on working alongside farmers. His willingness to endure long hours in the fields earned him credibility and trust. He disliked bureaucracy, often bypassing official channels to achieve results. Colleagues remembered him as blunt but effective, focused more on outcomes than formalities. His philosophy was simple. Hunger demanded urgent action, and scientific solutions mattered only if they reached those who needed them most. Borlaug's personality blended toughness with compassion. He was known for his fiery speeches, delivered with both passion and impatience. He had little tolerance for excuses, particularly from policymakers who ignored agricultural development. Yet his interactions with farmers revealed a different side: patience, humility, and genuine concern. He listened attentively, valued local knowledge, and adapted recommendations accordingly. This dual approach allowed him to navigate both scientific and political environments effectively. His leadership style inspired respect across cultures, uniting diverse actors behind the shared goal of fighting hunger. Stories from Borlaug's colleagues illustrate his relentless energy. Many recalled his habit of waking at dawn to inspect fields before others even began their day. He pushed teams to work long hours, yet he worked alongside them, never asking for more than he gave. His students often found him demanding, but later admitted his high expectations pushed them to excel. They remembered his insistence on persistence, his refusal to accept failure as permanent, and his ability to transform obstacles into opportunities through creativity and resilience. Students who trained under Borlaug frequently described him as a mentor who changed their lives. His lectures combined technical depth with moral urgency, leaving lasting impressions. He encouraged them to see science as service to humanity, not merely a career. Many former students went on to lead agricultural programs worldwide, carrying forward his ethos of practicality and compassion. His mentorship produced a ripple effect, ensuring that his influence extended far beyond his personal achievements. Through education, he multiplied his impact across generations and continents. Borlaug's influence extended deeply into international institutions. The Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, CGIAR, established in 1971, was shaped by the lessons of the Green Revolution. Its network of research centers adopted Borlaug's model, improving staple crops, distributing high-yield varieties, and training local scientists. The World Bank, FAO, and other organizations drew on his experiences to justify major agricultural investments. His work demonstrated that targeted research could generate enormous returns, influencing how international development agencies allocated resources during the late 20th century. The World Food Prize, which Borlaug founded in 1986, became a cornerstone of his institutional legacy. Modeled after the Nobel Prizes, it highlighted the role of agriculture in global stability and peace. Each year, laureates represented diverse fields, from plant breeding to food policy, reflecting Borlaug's belief that solving hunger required multifaceted approaches. By creating this prize, he ensured global recognition for agricultural innovation. It also inspired young scientists to enter the field, reinforcing the idea that agriculture was not only vital but honorable.